And we're live. So I wanted to talk about agency in role-playing games because there's been a bit of conversation about that recently with regard to some comments I've received on the stream where Ben was discussing his Halo game. And so I wanted to, okay. So I guess I didn't write anything down, obviously, so I'm not following a script, but like, I think the agency conversation is past due, right? Because I think that it is integral to how we understand role playing in the context of a role playing game. And when it is okay for that agency to be limited, that it is okay for that agency to be limited. What makes the most sense regarding its limitation, what makes the most sense to... I lost my train of thought because Brian hopped in to say hello. Hey, Brian, what's up? I'm so
Anytime. Glad. Stochastic Agency says it's a good time to talk about agency.
Anytime is a good time to talk about agency. Hey, BGD, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But really how it came about was there was a comment on one of the games, or I guess it was the first one, not one of the games, one of the breakdowns of Ben's Halo game. And it was, look, people got strong opinions, not going to hold that against anyone. They think certain thoughts, they are of a particular opinion. But it really kind of got me thinking on how the game that Ben was running, the Halo game, was a military simulation role-playing game. Right. Okay. And so in the context of a military simulation, and I've talked to Ben about this too, right? So in the context of a military simulation, limited agency makes sense, right? And there's going to be a lot of people out there.
Go ahead. Do you want to... I was going to say even severely restricted.
Yeah. Depending on like what's going on in the game. And so, like, without getting too deep into the details yet, because I think there are a couple of topics that we want to sort of filter down through before we start the discussion. Okay. It struck me, and it was a situation where I was like, you know what, we need to talk about agency. Okay, people need to know where I am coming from with regard to this topic, because it really is metacontextual, right? Like it is a filter through which a lot of people view role-playing games.
Yes.
And so I think that it's important to sort of establish this. I think that it's likely like well past due. I probably should have discussed it earlier. But
I mean, I don't know. There's been a clear progression throughout your videos, both in the scripted videos and in the streams. And I feel like that a lot of what we've been talking about kind of behind the scenes and stuff that's come up in various other streams, even oddly enough, a lot of the discussions by other like much more widely influential YouTubers have been touching on a lot of the very topics after the fact when we were discussing them before. Like it's very interesting that I feel like maybe this is just part of the zeitgeist, and it's kind of like naturally emerged at the rate that it needed to, I suppose.
Sure.
So I'm going to
go with everyone's watching my videos.
That's exactly.
That's what I'll go with. Clearly not true.
You are the Gestalt consciousness.
Yeah. I am the hive mind.
No, but seriously though, it is very interesting how we've been kind of digging into these subjects for a better part of a year now. Sometimes in an ancillary fashion and sometimes more directly, and we have started coming across and seeing other videos and discussions come up about them. So I think that I don't know that it's something you should have brought up earlier so much as that it is the right time to bring it up just because of the way the discussion has evolved.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty solid observation. I think you're right. Yeah. Okay. I agree.
Give yourself some credit, man.
Okay, fine. I'll take the credit.
Okay, good.
So, with regard to that game, and then also the safety tools conversation, because obviously that involves agency. I brought up agency in that, in that video, and I have, look, I tend to be a critical thinker, or at least I view myself as a critical thinker. Whether or not I follow through critically on all of my thoughts, another topic. But generally speaking, I like to sit down. I like to ask why. He's he's basing his video on everything he doesn't see or hear here. Well, I'll tell you what, Brian. I've been watching your videos. I love the production value. You're an ass kicker with this stuff. If ever you would like to have a conversation about any of these things, please let me know. I would love to schedule something. We can just sit down and have a conversation. It would be, or at least a recorded conversation. Obviously, we have conversations, but it would be a recorded one, and I think that it would be quite valuable. So just let me know.
That would be really interesting.
I don't know if you've seen any of his videos. He started recording things again recently, and they're all bangers. So I would go and check him out. Anyone who is watching, who hasn't seen him, Stochastic Agency, excellent channel. Please do go and take a look. But
I love the use of stochastic, by the way. That's great.
It's a good channel name for sure. So back to agency. So it came up in safety tools, and okay. Let me retrack. So I think of myself as a critical thinker. And so I like to sit down and I like to ask the question, why? And I really like to sort of try and follow through a logical thread to explain my position. So I'll sit down initially and go, I don't like safety tools. Why don't I like safety tools? And so I will have that conversation with myself and try to figure out what it is about them that I don't like. Now, everything in that last video, if I may grandstand for a moment, everything in that last video was about perspective, not practice. And I think that I can't say that forcefully enough. There are going to be, I like to role play with people, right? And so sometimes I'm going to role play with people that want to use safety tools, regardless of what my opinion is about them, regardless of how eye-rolly I get about it. If I want to role play with someone, I'm not going to allow that to prevent me from role playing with them, right?
Right.
So, and I said that at the top of the video. I said, look, it's not going to prevent me from playing in games where they're used. This is my opinion on them, right? And so I have a perspective. There are many other people who have different perspectives. I think that my views on safety tools I think I thought through it pretty solidly, right? I think it was
I would agree.
So, but I'm that doesn't mean, there were some people saying, oh, you lack compassion. It's like, well, no, I don't lack compassion. Safety tools do not have the market cornered on compassion. And I express that compassion in another way. In fact, maybe we'll get to it. Maybe we won't. There's some things because I have a planned conversation coming up with Jax, which I think is going to be good because Jax disagrees with me. So it's going to be me on the one side, Jax on the other, and we're going to have that. We're going to, meet in the middle. We're going to try to meet in the middle. And I think it's going to be a really great conversation because we have those two opposing views. So I'll say what I have to say for that.
Okay.
But,
I'm sure it's going to be
this video. But let's get into agency. Let's talk about agency. So you wanted to make sure that we established agency versus autonomy up front, correct?
There's a couple of things. The first one, there's a couple of questions, I guess I could say. And the first one was, in the previous conversations, we kind of took a little bit of a break over the holidays for obvious reasons. Holidays. But in some of our previous conversations up to this point, when you said you wanted to do this stream, you specifically said you wanted to talk to me about this on stream, and I was just kind of curious why. Okay. That's my first question, and then I have another one after.
Number one, I value your opinion. Blanket statement.
Okay.
Number two, specifically with regard to agency, I think that you have some insights based on indications that we've had conversations. We talk all the time.
Yeah.
And there are some indications that, you have an opinion on this. This isn't a question that I'm going to ask you. Say, hey, well, what do you think about agency and TTRPGs? And you go, oh, well, I haven't really thought about it. Or what do you mean by agency? These are things that you have definitive opinions on, that you've thought about, that you've thought critically about. And I wanted that exchange, right? I wanted that because I want this conversation to be engaging, for me, let alone for the audience. I want it to be engaging for the audience. I want it to be engaging for me. And I don't have the market cornered on any of this crap, right? So I want another opinion. I want another voice here. Maybe we agree. Maybe we disagree. I don't know for sure. If I'm guessing, I would say we're largely going to agree. But I still, I thought that you would be a very good person to have this discussion because you have thought about this before. This is something that you've sat down and with intent said, I'm going to think about agency now, and you've taken it and followed it through to a natural conclusion. So that's why I asked you to have this conversation with me.
Okay, that makes I can totally see that, and I do think you're right insofar as we do tend to generally agree on most things surrounding the TTRPG, hobby in general, as well as a lot of other things, but. I mean, number one, let me just say I appreciate what you said. That I've always enjoyed hashing ideas out with you, but you're right. This is something that I have thought about in detail. And interestingly enough, it's not just about games. There's stuff going on with this particular aspect of role-playing games that I think is a very recent development in the hobby, which ties into a lot of let's call it postmodernist moral relativism, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Which then actually kind of funnels me into my next question, which was you had mentioned a couple of times, and I did bring this up in a couple of our previous conversations, actually, in your safety tools video, you were talking about agency, and then a few times you also mentioned autonomy. And my question about that is, what do you feel like agency is? How does it differ from autonomy?
Okay. Well, specifically, when I say agency, I'm using, and maybe this is wrong for me to do, but this is a definition that I've kind of carried over from video games. So player agency in game design, video game design, I should say, usually refers to the degree of freedom given by the developer to the players to influence and change the game world. Now,
yes, actually,
obviously, it is different in an RPG or in a tabletop role-playing game because no one's giving you anything, right? You have that autonomy, which is, I think, the distinction that you're going to make. But if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. That's totally fine. Let me answer you directly.
Sure.
When I say agency, what I mean is the player's ability to freely influence the world around them. That's what I mean. So, coming from video games, it has to be the amount that the developer gives the player.
Right.
But over here on this side of, in this little corner, this little niche of gaming writ large, on the tabletop role-playing game, table. What I mean is the ability of the player through their character to freely affect the world around them.
Through the character. Okay. Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Well, see, here's the thing, though, right? Because let me just talk over you the whole time. I'll be finished after this. and this is something that's come up behind the scenes as well with you and I and other conversations. There are levels of agency for the game master, the players, the characters, right? There are different ways that these individual entities can express themselves freely, either at the table or in the game world.
Okay.
And that's it. I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay. That's like that. Okay. That is the perfect segue. That's the perfect springboard right there, because I'm really actually very, very glad that you brought up video games as kind of the origination point of this particular usage of the term agency.
Okay.
Because I think a lot, as we've talked about before, I think there's a lot of confusion around the term, specifically because it's used in a way that the word is not actually defined. And that kind of ties back. Oh boy, I'll just leave it there for now, because I'm sure it'll come up again.
Sure.
But it kind of ties back to this trend that there has been over the last few decades about redefining words, or rather reusing words in a way that is not particularly well defined, let's say. And that's a whole other bigger subject beyond just the TTRPG hobby.
Yeah, it's a language subject, really. It's
yeah. Regardless, there is definitely some kind of, let's say, bleed through, and I'm not using it in the way that bleed is typically used for TTRPGs.
Right.
But there is definitely bleed through of terms and concepts and even mechanics in some cases from video games into RPGs. Like it's an interesting loop, right? Like
it is. It's a full circle scenario.
Gygax and Arneson and all of them, they created this hobby. Like it didn't exist in this form. They took wargaming and they changed it and they made something new out of it. And almost every single video game, or at least every game design from that point, from the inception of video games, has been influenced by that thought process that they came up with. Like the idea of levels, the idea of experience points, it is ubiquitous throughout video games, probably more so than any other aspect of popular culture. The influence of Dungeons and Dragons and the whole role-playing game, tabletop role-playing game mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now we've kind of come, as you just mentioned, we're kind of coming into a loop where the TTRPG is being influenced by particular manifestations of the mechanics that are being used in video games, especially MMOs. And changing to meet those kinds of expectations. And
that was fourth edition, very noticeably fourth edition. Really
yes. Oh yeah. No.
Obviously that philosophy has carried forward as well, but it was
for sure
really noticeable in fourth.
In fact, Professor DM had one of his most recent videos where he was talking about actually interviewing somebody who actually worked at WotC, I believe, and was just like going down the list and asking him, hey, was fourth edition an attempt to bring Warcraft to the tabletop? And basically and like all these kinds of questions about that trend, right?
Mm-hmm. Which, that's a whole conversation unto itself, right? Like, should it have tried to do that? Should it have relied more on its strengths than tried to, call an audible, 30 years after the fact, or, it just.
Shoulda, coulda, woulda. That is a totally different subject for sure.
It is. But this is the way things happen. This is the history.
But this is the place where we are now, and so there's this cross pollination going back and forth the whole time. I like the idea that you brought up agency as used in the context of a video game, whereas the player's agency, you actually outright said the player's agency in a video game is dictated by the developer.
Yes.
They have agency only insofar as the developer programs it in.
Correct. They can only do the things that have been accounted for by the developer. Right.
Which is, I think, key to the understanding of the word in and of itself, because agency, like, just to make sure that I was personally understanding everything, like my own critical thought processes were not going the wrong direction, let's say. I actually went and read a few different definitions of the word agency as one of the preparations for this conversation. So if you pull up a definition, I just pulled one up right now for dictionary.com.
Like
yeah, dictionary.com, whichever, I don't know who wrote it. It's a noun. First one is an organization, company, or bureau that provides a particular service. Number two is a company having a franchise to represent another. Number three is a government bureau or administrative division, an office that represents it. A place of business where an agent works. Agency, now we start getting into the little more nebulous, the duty or function of an agent. Of the state of being in action or of exerting power. Or the capacity to act or exert power, right? Mm-hmm. Which is typically the way it's used, I think, in this context.
Yeah, that's. I will say that is usually how I use it, though. There's likely more specificity, depending on what the actual topic is. Hey, Charlie, thanks for stopping by. Good to have you here.
Hey, yeah, good to see everyone. Thanks everybody for being here.
Yeah, for real. Thank you, everyone.
I think that the biggest, there really can't be more of a perfect idea of agency as power than a video game, in my opinion, because agency is power exerted on behalf of an organization, basically. Agency, there is no such thing as agency on your own volition. Like, for example, what is another? You can have a so-called free agent. Where is that seen? It's seen in sports, right? And the free agent cannot play the game until he signs a contract with the team. So if you're a free agent, yeah, you're free. You have all the power that you want, except you can't go walking onto the field to go play the game. You have to link yourself to the agency, which then gives you the authority to act on their behalf.
I think I see the direction that you're headed with this.
Right. So when people talk about agency, I think that it is in some ways revealing, because you can, if you're saying that your agency is being subverted or interfered with or ignored or what have you, what you're saying is the power that is given to me from another source is being ignored or changed, or what have you. So in a much darker way, back in the mid 20th century, we heard this. The "I was only following orders" defense is an appeal to agency.
Gotcha.
I was just an agent of this organization. I was just doing what I was told. I was perfectly within my rights to act that way because I was acting in authority given from a different source. So the implicit idea behind agency is I can exert influence and not be subject to the repercussions of it. Right?
Okay. Understood. Yes.
That is a very specific, like,
it is, and the thing with that is that, like, I don't know if that's a common usage thing today, February 9th, 2025, but I think that it is, like, to know the history of the word and how it passed into common parlance
But here's the thing: is
come to mean what it means. I think it's interesting, first of all, and it's I think if you juxtapose that against autonomy, which I think is what you're about to do, it makes sense.
And I don't think it's an accident either. Like, yes, the idea, again, the video game, and this was the video game, I'm going to keep going back to it because it's actually not one that I specifically thought of ahead of time. You brought that up, and I'm like, of course, because the only actions you can take are the ones that are given to you by the higher authority who created the entirety of the whatever thing it is that you're doing right now.
Right.
In a video game, like, they give you the illusion of self-determination, but they only allow you to do what they can program you to do.
Yes.
And in a larger kind of cultural, I guess, sense, in the kind of moral relativism, like I mentioned earlier, it's also, and okay, this is going to tie back to this is going to tie back to the safety tools discussion. My biggest problem with safety tools is that it's the exact same thing as what is typically called the rules lawyer, right? The rules lawyer goes to the source book and says, actually, you can't do that because the game rules say X, Y, Z, and they're trying to dictate to you how the game should be played by an external authority, right?
Gotcha.
The ones who made the game. Whereas now we're putting the safety tools in the rule books, and now the same mindset, people who also want to influence how the game is going, are just doing the exact same thing with a slightly different flavor, right?
Okay. Now I'm going to stop here, and
sure.
I'm going to say that I think that, I mean, obviously, I think your opinion is valid. I think my opinion is valid. I think thinking this through to the end, but I will say here that Jax has expressed a distinct and equally critical and valid position, and so I'm very interested to have that conversation.
I'm very interested to hear it.
I think that what you have expressed and what I have expressed, not the end all be all. Also,
right.
This is a case where multiple things from multiple perspectives can be true all at once. What it becomes is a matter of, and I said this in the video, it becomes a matter of values and prioritization. What do you value? Yeah. That's going to determine how you decide to jockey around this issue, right?
Right.
And so, perspectives are going to change. I even said this in the video. I said, look, man, people prioritize things differently. Everyone's going to do it. None of this is a criticism. It's just how you happen to take it. And so I just wanted to sort of stop, pause, put that in there. I hope Jax would appreciate that. But I just want to make sure that, like, you and I are going to make strong statements about this stuff. Okay? Very opinionated, very strong statements with very little room for ambiguity. And so I just want people to know that while we hold these opinions, or at least I'll speak for me, while I hold these opinions, that doesn't preclude me from understanding other perspectives or other points of view or other opinions. So I will just put that there.
Yeah, 100%. I also thought, if anybody is watching this that hasn't seen Heath's Morning Grind, was it a Morning Grind? It was a Morning Grind.
It was last Wednesday.
Last Wednesday, about safety tools as well. He brought up a very, very interesting point about how they almost seem as if it's a tabletop or pen and paper version of what we've come to expect as far as digital communication goes. Through
like emojis. I think he specifically called them out as emojis, right?
Maybe
I'm misremembering, but
I think I called them emojis.
I see.
But he mentioned that maybe it's a kind of offshoot of the digitization of interaction. The faceless behind the screen thing, so people don't actually interact face to face and read nonverbal cues the way that they did before a smartphone, let's say.
Yes.
Which I thought was a very, very interesting and potentially very valid point.
I agree.
And it changed my perspective a little bit on safety tools.
Yep.
Like, I was like, okay, I can see a context in which they manifested, let's say, and a context in which they can be useful. That doesn't change that there has been an overall. I'm trying to be very careful about this particular conversation because I can't help but tie the ideas behind the way agency is used to manipulate play in this hobby to the larger metatextual postmodernist moral relativism that has just permeated society. And in some cases that might be for an advantage. In many, if not most, I believe it's for the worse. And part of that is the lack of clarity within language. Language has become less useful as a tool for communication because it's oftentimes used only as a way to. In some cases, I believe the meaning of words is specific has purposefully been obfuscated as a way to exert influence or create control.
I see what you're saying, but I think that's a much larger discussion.
It is a much
larger to have in this moment.
No. I'm just bringing this up because I'm going to be making declarative statements, and I'm going to be saying this is this way, and it's because agency is not being used properly, and yada yada yada. And that's
okay.
And it's because of a much larger and years long kind of critical thinking train that I've been going on.
Gotcha.
And this may be springing this kind of on you as a bit of a surprise. We didn't really discuss this before this stream, but it's just that I don't know if I have at this point the ability to completely divorce the two perspectives, a larger cultural perspective from some of the specifics I want to talk about tonight. If that makes sense?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So anyway, I wanted to get into the idea behind what agency actually means. And agency implies that you are an agent. You are working on behalf of something that is bigger than you, essentially. And
gotcha.
And that the authority that you wield does not come from you. It is the authority that is on behalf of something by necessity nebulous because it's not there in the moment with you. But you are using its influence to give legitimacy to your actions. If that makes sense?
Gotcha. Yes.
Okay. So I don't know if anybody in the chat or
they're all checked out now.
I don't know if they're going to agree with that or not, but that's kind of that's the base perspective I'm coming from with this.
Well, I can't speak for anyone in chat, but I will say, BGD has something to say. The RPG experience is among the most complex pastimes humankind has yet to devise. It is only fitting that our attempts to optimize that experience, like safety tools, are complex solutions to employ. I agree with that. I think that's a perfectly valid, reasonable take. And I'm sure he would expect me to say that because he and I have had, I would say, we've had conversations about this, or we've at least commented back and forth, and sort of tried to approach this from common ground, which I think we've achieved. I think he and I have achieved that. I think that
BGD, having played in his games, is a fantastic GM.
Oh yeah,
who deeply understands this hobby, and so I automatically any comment that he puts out, I automatically just take it and accept it, and I'm like, okay, this is coming from the perspective of somebody who knows this hobby and knows how to run a game, and I'm going to take it.
Well, not only that, I'm going to try. Like participated in his games, and I have too.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So
and so
here we go, 100%. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Like I think that I feel like everybody should listen to BGD because he and just take his comments on face value and then start trying to kind of apply them to your own experiences, because he's a great GM. He has a plethora of experience and a very measured and balanced take on the hobby, and all of the weird little conflicts, if you want to call them that, differences, perspectives. Like he's pretty kind of down the center, which I try to be as well. Is like I'll play with anybody who wants to play in a respectful and enjoyable way, and it doesn't matter if you think safety tools are like need to be in every game, or you're like a 4D role player who thinks you have to, specify your character interactions in a particular way. Okay, if we're having fun together, we're playing an RPG, so I don't care. When it comes right down to it at the table, what we're talking about tonight is actually esoterica. It's like we're almost doing like I don't know, high level math, let's say.
Well, it's also kind of a little bit like spinning our wheels, right? Like let's have these. Let's try to turn what has in the past been a very nerdy pastime into something intellectual and something a little bit more critical than it was really ever treated as. So but that is the natural little bit of that, maybe a lot.
That is the natural progression of anything, though. Like you look at the history of powered manned flight. That's a bunch of people in the backs of their barns putting stuff together to see if it'll fly.
True.
And then Wright brothers succeed, and there are practical reasons. Just as
I agree. There are practical reasons to discuss agency.
There are practical reasons.
Further, I just wanted to say, BGD. We don't say it because we like you, though we do. We say it because it's true.
Exactly. I have immense respect for BGD. He is he's great. Like his videos are great.
I mean,
great. His perspectives are great.
Great GMs. In a very short period of time, I've met great GMs. It's pretty cool.
And that's the other thing too, is that anybody can be a great GM. It's not a hard thing to do if you want to put the work into it, which BGD obviously has. It just requires.
This is a sidetrack, though. We should probably get back to the topic at hand.
No, that's true.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm just saying, anybody can do this. It's a hobby, man, and just like powered manned flight, the discussions are naturally going to become more sophisticated and more particulate and particular as it matures. But that doesn't mean you can't just feel your way through it. That's the way we all started.
Yeah, it is a skill, and you will get better as you do more of it over time. So do it over time, and you will. Well, I would hope that you would improve. If you're not improving over time, then something's wrong. Something's preventing you from. So there's going to have to be an examination that takes place there. But generally speaking, if you are earnest about getting better and you are doing more of it over time, you will improve.
Yeah, if you come to it with good faith, like people who we all know the problem players, but the problem is not in the hobby. The problem is not in the game. The problem is in the player.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So agency. When is it? Okay, so having nerdy high-level conversations are the most fertile ground for developing the next evolution of actionable improvements for the game.
And that's what
that is true and correct. Yes. And I would agree.
That's what we're trying to do here, right?
I think that's what we're trying to do. I think that's what we're trying to do.
I agree.
That's what I'm trying to do with the video series with regard to myth and shamanism and GMs as shamans. It's what we're trying to do here when we talk about agency or even talk about safety tools, right? Like
let's make sure to touch on your series about myth and shamanism as it relates to TTRPGs as well, because I think that's going to be really important.
Okay.
Later on in this discussion.
Yeah, sure.
We've already talked about this more than once as a response to those videos, that the one of the reasons that it's so hard to define the TTRPG as a game is that it's not actually a game. I think what you have kind of brought to the forefront in your series of videos that I would wish and hope and believe needs to permeate throughout the hobby is the idea of the RPG as a ritual, not a game, and that the GM is a shaman, and that the experience that we're engaging in, we are essentially casting the knuckle bones to see what fate decides, just the way that rituals were used to try and influence real life, except we're only doing it in our minds.
Yes.
But the only difference is that we're keeping it on the table rather than allowing it to dictate our actual real life actions. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So
but the lessons are still real, right?
So the lessons are still real.
Going to influence your actions.
They are still going to influence your actions. They are a way of engaging with potentially difficult or at the very least uncommonly encountered situations in a way that you can do so with no actual risk, and then take that lesson into your day-to-day life and use it to make informed decisions, which is what a ritual is all about. And yes. I think that your series on that is incredibly insightful, very interesting, and very relevant, and probably one of the deepest insights into the hobby itself that I've ever seen since like the Forge back in the 2000s when they were trying to get the No, I'm serious.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate the kind words. But let's get back to agency. So you wanted to make the distinction between agency and autonomy because of the shift in meaning from agency, or at least the perceived shift. And so I was using agency as I had explained, right? However, autonomy was likely a better term, right?
I would say so.
So the way that I used
the way you were using it, yes.
Well, I think the most I used the word autonomy when I was trying to really drill down on open door policies, right? And so the open door policy is just your autonomy that is a social expectation, right? That you never lose, regardless, unless you are actually, chained by the ankle to some, you are autonomous. You can go wherever you want, right? Unless you're prevented from doing so by, maybe it's a locked door, maybe, dramatically it's your ankle being chained. But, and so that's really where I sort of used autonomy. But I think that, extrapolating from that, autonomy at the table. So there's player autonomy, right?
Yes.
There's GM autonomy. Does that mean that there would be character agency? Because the character is receiving its directives from you.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly following my train of thought, it sounds
okay.
like. Yeah.
Okay.
So as far as agency goes in practice at the table, characters have agency because they are your translation of will and authority into the game space, world, concept, whatever you want to call it.
Gotcha.
So really the only, in my opinion, the only entity, if we want to call the character, I mean, the character is your agent in the world of the game.
Yes.
And so it has agency because you grant it full authority, your own power to act within that world, within that imagined shared space.
Gotcha.
And so characters have agency? Yes. Characters have agency. That's all they have.
I was accidentally correct, right? So when I was talking about the limitation of character agency, that was accurate because it doesn't limit player autonomy, because player autonomy, by definition, it's not limited.
Exactly.
So, okay. All right. I like where you're going with this.
Okay, good.
Elon says, I think theater is a more accurate and functional analogy than shamanism. It's not that deep. That's cool, man. And I say at the start of the start of the series, the video series, if you think it's bullshit, you're not going to agree with it, and that's fine. And I'm very happy to have people think that it's bullshit. I have no problem with that.
I'd be, and we're not going to do it in this stream, but I'd be happy to talk about the idea of GM as shaman and RPG as ritual, because
I'd love to.
I think it is highly defensible. I think it is actually much more applicable than theater.
Well, I'll tell you what. We'll set that up for next week or something. This coming week, I think I have something on Wednesday and Thursday, and Friday has been annexed for movie night, so Friday's out now.
Okay.
But the following Sunday or the following Wednesday, however you want to handle it, man, I am like super jazzed to get that on the books and talk about it.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to do that. I think it is tied to what we're talking about tonight.
Cool.
Because of the whole idea behind animus and anima, as you were talking about, the idea of avatars. Avatar is typically used in the video game design to speak about whatever the player is controlling. The character that the player is controlling is your avatar. And that has a very specific connotation as well, which I understand that words change in meaning due to common usage. However, there's a reason that they're used in the way that they are at the beginning. So,
yep, I agree.
So in a lot of ways, agent and avatar are both applicable to the player characters.
Yes, they are. They are my agent in the world. They are the device through which I express my autonomy in the game world through their agency, because I grant them the power and the permission and the directive, as you said, to act in the ways that they act. Likewise, they are a representation of me within the game world, so they are also an avatar.
Yeah, 100%. So and we. By the way,
I like this. I really like
this. We didn't discuss this ahead of time. Like these particulars that we're talking about now, this is going in real time. We've had conversations about this subject, but not in this particular way. So this is all. So
this isn't canned. This is me listening to what you're saying, understanding the points that you've made in the past, how you've made them, how you like to construct them, and seeing a very clear direction in where we're moving. So
and I don't know if it 100% aligns.
Hey, Exile, how are you? Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No problem. Welcome to the stream. I don't know if this 100% aligns with your perspectives or thoughts on it so far, but this is just kind of, as soon as you were saying we want to do an agency stream, this is where my head went. So agency, in my opinion, agency only applies at the level of what's going on at the table. And to be clear, I have always, we've talked a little bit about this model about RPG game design that I'm working on. I'm not going to bring it up here in any detail other than to say that I have always viewed the edge of the table as this kind of membrane, and anything that happens inside is its own world, and you are not your character.
Yep, it's a semi-permeable membrane. I like that.
Yes, that is a semi-permeable membrane. We've already talked about the cell and the cellular model, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm excited for those videos, and I would, not revealing any detail that we may have discussed, I would just ask that those who are currently in attendance, the magic circle. I would ask those who are currently in attendance to please keep an eye out for those videos. That's going to be on Titterpig Rancher's channel. This is his baby. This is his idea. I'm excited for them, and I would just encourage people to likewise be excited for them.
And it's there are numerous reasons that have delayed them. We're not going to get into it, but the idea is that there is a semi-permeable membrane, just like a cellular barrier, a cellular membrane, that encircles the edge of your gaming table. And whatever happens inside there is
it stays there.
Yes, it stays there
in a material way, but in an immaterial way, you carry it with you.
Well, yes, you always carry it with you as a memory, right? Like the experiences that you share at that table, outside of that membrane. And this gets into our discussions that we've had about metagaming as well. The experience that you have inside that table, you will remember as if it were a dream. But everything that happened in that game session feeds into that experience that you had. And so the memories you share with people that were at that table is both inside that semi-permeable membrane and all the meta gaming that happened outside as your, hey, can you grab me a Coke? Yeah. And then somebody cracks a joke and you laugh. And that influences how your characters respond in the moment to whatever's going on. And everybody laughs. And that's part of your memories, man. Like this, and that's why also that this is why I think your idea of the RPG as a ritual is so brilliant. Because all of that is part of what rituals are too. I don't know how many people have actually been to rituals. I have. I've done medicine journeys with various assistant substances, let's say.
The most I've done is read about them and play role-playing games.
Right.
That's the most I've
done. and to be honest, in our current kind of technological, industrialized, modern, suburban society that we have, urban or suburban, whatever, wherever you live, that kind of experience you have around the RPG table is going to be the most ritualistic thing you're going to do.
Yeah, and I covered a lot of this in my video as far as, it being, I think the weakest point I make is probably that it is a state-induced, shared, altered state of consciousness kind of a situation, because there's no substances, there's but there is, at least in a figurative but in a very real way, an altering that takes place because you submit yourself to the idea that you are now in an imagined space with a character that you can exert your agency in this space over. So, I think that's probably the weakest point that I make throughout the video, or videos, I should say. But there's definitely similarities. But
and yet I think it's
the agency.
I think it's the strongest through line of what you're exploring in those videos.
Oh, well, I'm super happy to have this conversation then. So like I said, you and I should, after this, probably kind of firm up a date, and I'll see if Ben and Jax want to participate, or if they have time to. It's really kind of come down to time at this point.
Sure.
But I'll ask around and see if they want to participate. I might even extend invites to others as well, depending on whether or not they want to or have the time. But the more people, the difficult the schedule is going to be to firm up. But we'll figure it out. But so to get back to agency, so character agency is the authority granted to them by the player in their autonomy,
in their ability to affect the results that they're looking for.
Gotcha. So
like the character has zero autonomy. Has zero autonomy.
So that agency becomes, first of all, is very important to the role-playing hobby. That agency is extremely important. Obviously, it is the essence of the hobby. And so there is, varying degrees of importance that are placed on agency. So people who are aware of it, people who examine it, people who are focused on it, really ratchet up the importance of agency within the context of the role-playing game, right?
Yeah.
And then there are those who might engage in the hobby of, role-playing game, but they're either unaware of it or haven't thought critically about it. And so those games are going to look drastically different to the ones who have thought about it, who are aware of it, and who want that in their experience.
Well, yes, but also there are people who just intrinsically understand that the character as an agent is not me, and nothing that happens to them is in any way a criticism of myself, nor is it going to actually...
Oh, sure. Yeah, there is that. There
for
is
example,
a degree of separation that people are aware of. Yes.
Here's an illustration of an agent that everybody will be able to resonate with. The last alliance of elves and men rolls on up to the gates of Mordor, and the mouth of Sauron comes out to meet them.
Oh, this sounds awesome. What are you talking about? Just kidding. Keep going.
And I very much prefer the books, but I'm using the movies because that's what most people have encountered, I guess. Mm-hmm. The mouth of Sauron rolls out to meet them, and he is haughty, he is dismissive, he is demanding, and has an aspect which is horrific that seems to mirror his master. So he is speaking with the words of sorrow. Mm-hmm. And then Strider rides on up beside him and cuts his head off.
Cuts his head off, yep.
And what happens? Does he harm Sauron in any way? No. The agent was exerting Sauron's authority and influence.
Right.
The agent took the consequences. The agent was eliminated and did absolutely nothing to affect the agency, which gave him the authority to speak. Right.
Right.
So this is you as the player and the character on the table.
Okay. And this, I think, becomes, and again, this is we didn't pregame any of this. So no. I am hearing you say this as you are saying it. And so this now becomes a pretty majorly important distinction to make between agency and autonomy.
Right.
Because while the agency is affected, the autonomy is not.
Right.
And so, and now within the context of the game, right? And as far as the importance of the agency is concerned, like just to I think that's a very prescient point, and I think that's going to be integrated moving forward. So I don't want to seem like I'm skipping over it or I'm passing it by without giving it the due respect.
Train of thought, I get it.
Right. So getting back to what I was saying previously about there are individuals who are aware of agency, and that usually, at least in my experience, this is anecdotal, of course, but in my experience, people who are aware of the agency involved in role-playing games tend to place a lot of importance on agency, and those who are unaware of it usually don't place much importance on it. Now, and the example that I'll give is this, is that there are games where the GM, you will propose an action to the GM, and the GM will say yes, and then the GM will effectively, quote unquote, move you, right? Like, yes, you step into the hallway, you turn to the right, you see, the shadow of an orc on the wall, whatever. Right. And the GM does the movement. But that is I'll get there. That is an infringement on character agency, because that is now the autonomy of the GM acting through this other player's character.
Right.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
I mean, okay. This is pretty great. So that, and in a situation where that happens, I'm going to call them low awareness, high awareness, right? I'm referring to nothing other than an awareness of agency. So there are people who are on the low awareness end who are not really aware of the agency involved and therefore likely do not place importance on it. There are people on the high awareness end who are acutely aware of the agency involved and so likely place a higher degree of importance on this. Mm-hmm. So in a high awareness game, infringing on character agency like that specifically is troublesome because you can see why, right? Like, I don't have to express why. If you're placing a high degree of importance on character agency and it's just been taken from you, you've taken essentially the whole game from them, right? At least in that moment, in that moment, you've taken the whole game from them. And in the case of a low awareness individual, it doesn't really matter, right? Because they said they wanted to do something, and so they did it. You may have talked to them through. You've described how it was done, and instead of them, and it's not really a big deal. And so I think, right? I think that agency is a big deal. I'm a high awareness player with regard to agency. That doesn't mean I can't play in a low awareness game. I'm happy to, because like I said at the top of the show, I like to play with people. So if that's the kind of game we're going to play, you know what? I can handle it for a session, for 2 sessions. I'm cool with that. Let's go. Let's do it. I just want to play with the people. But there are those, and I would say that I think that most of, I'm not familiar with this, the impossible thing before breakfast premise.
Oh yeah.
Can you just
the impossible thing for breakfast is a reference to Through the Looking Glass.
To what?
Through the Looking Glass. It's
okay.
it's the conversation that Alice has with, I believe, Humpty Dumpty. Oh, I typically imagine 12 impossible things before breakfast, or whatever it is that he says. And the you'll have Anna and Adderland, you're going to have to. I'm very well familiar with the Forge, but you're going to have to refresh my memory about what specifically, because I came to the Forge after it was offline, unfortunately. So everything I've come to it that I've learned about it has been through archival and through Adept Play, which is Ron Edwards' current site. So I'm not specifically sure what you mean by referring Alice in Wonderland to the Forge. But
neither am I. So
the impossible things before breakfast is a direct reference, a direct quote.
If you can, within the awful YouTube comments, or chat, I should say, within awful comments are awful too, but that's neither here nor there. Within the awful YouTube chat, great, you're going to get a summary. Okay, awesome, awesome, perfect. If you care to share it, awesome. If not, somewhere in Discord, right? You can message me directly in Discord. You can find my screen name in the Raven Keep, and we can all have a conversation. You can just toss it out there in Discord. I am entirely unfamiliar with this, so thank you for getting the summary. I'm gonna pass over that for now, though. So I'm gonna switch tracks a little bit here too, right? So as a high awareness player with regard to agency,
okay,
I think that there are appropriate times to limit my agency within the context of a game. I don't think that it's ever appropriate to limit my autonomy. I think, but within the context of the game, I think there are okay times to limit agency. But all of those times that you limit agency, because I'm a high awareness player, have to be in the direction of supporting the role play itself. Right? So
yes, mostly.
I would say that I would like to maybe challenge myself to come up with an example of where if it is limiting agency and in support of role play, that it's still not okay. I would like to think about this and see if I could come up with a situation that I've experienced. But whatever. So in this moment where
well, I mean, that my very first response to that would be what is typically meant by railroading.
By what? Oh, railroading. Yep. Oh, okay.
Right.
Sure. Yep. Sure.
That's the player saying, my character wants to do X, and the GM saying, you can't, so you have to do Y.
Or right? Saying, okay, you can do that, but Y is still the result.
Or that, sure.
Yeah.
Which is a slightly more subtle way of railroading, but
right. But it's still railroading. I would still count that as railroading.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm talking about, right? So if I am let's take Ben, right? So I am in a military simulation role-playing game.
Yeah.
As I fall under a chain of command, as I am ensconced within a military structure, there are things inevitably that are going to diminish my agency, my character's agency, that are acceptable, that are expected and encouraged because of the type of game that you're in. And it's kind of the same thing that we touched on when we were having the discussion with Ben about horror, right? So a long time ago, did a live stream. I think it was the first stream that you were on with Ben and Jax. And we discussed horror, and we brought up the appropriateness of limiting character agency within a horror setting. Now, obviously, this is not something that you want to lean on or abuse, because this is the essence of the role-playing activity, is having this agency through your character and being able to affect the imagined space, the game world, in ways that you choose through this vessel. Right?
Okay, and let me just quickly interject. I think this is where genre actually becomes relevant, because you're going to have a spectrum from, say, horror at the bottom end all the way up to heroic fantasy and like superheroes at the top end, which is intrinsic upon how harshly it limits the character agency.
Say that again.
So at the bottom end with the lowest agency would be horror.
Okay, yes.
Character agency would be horror, and then you go in an ascending graduation all the way up to heroic fantasy and like superhero games with maximal agency and lowest possible intrusion of the world upon that agency.
Gotcha.
Correct?
Yes. Okay.
See what I'm saying?
Agree. Yes, I'm on the same page.
Okay. All right. And this is, again, we didn't pregame this. This is something based upon what you just said. Yeah. It was like, oh, dude, that's where genre comes from.
Yeah. Yes. Agree. I think that it exists on this. Okay. So here we go. Anon is back with a summary. Basically, it's the idea that it's possible for the GM to have complete control of the story while the player has complete control over their character simultaneously. I need to think about this more, and I need to consider it more. Right?
Having already thought about this in the context of the agency discussion, I see what you're saying, and I do agree in part, but not in total.
I think that that's where I'm going to come from too, because so Jax and I recently had a conversation about living plot and what that means to role-playing games, and how the plot is, as a structure, is an emergent living thing affected by character choice, GM reaction, and any action resolution system involving dice or a random element, cards, whatever you're using. And so the narrative and also the story, but maybe not the story. I can't remember what we landed on, and it's only the first conversation that we've had about this. It's like the story might contain the wider world, but the narrative emerges according to the plot as that emerges through character action, action resolution, and GM presentation. It's not easy to keep straight in my head, and discussing things like narrative and story are a frigging nightmare. Which is why
I think that comes down to the difference between theater and ritual.
Well, there's also, like, we latched onto Bordwell and Thompson because it's a very, well, I'm not even going to say that. I was going to say it's a very clear definition. It's not a very clear definition, but at least it's like, it's understandable and it's workable. And so I think selecting a definition, and because it's one that I actually quite like, it's one that Jax did their dissertation on, or maybe not on it, but it was involved in the dissertation. And so it's one that they're familiar with. And I like the definition. I think it's very workable, especially in the context of this sort of exercise, this critical thought about RPGs.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we landed, but I don't know if I agree with this. I don't know if it's because I use the language differently, or if it's because, well, I know it's because I need to think more on it before
I have a construct that I'm stepping through during this conversation.
Okay.
It started with the idea of the Mouth of Sauron as the agent.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to step up through player to GM.
Mm-hmm.
That uses the analogy of the sports team as well.
Okay.
That does not. That comment doesn't fit.
Okay.
Like, it has a role, yes, but it is not 100% accurate, I don't think, when it comes to agency.
Okay. I will say that I generally tend not to. I appreciate Ron Edwards for his thought investment.
Yeah, me too.
I will say that I largely disagree with the vast majority of what's come out of the Forge. Also, I will say that the fact that now I wasn't there, so I don't know firsthand, but what I have heard is that Edwards had this penchant for shutting down opposing views or shutting down being challenged in real time. Like, he would propose something and someone would challenge it, and then it would be shut down. So yes, we have evolved since the Forge.
Yeah, right. No,
yes.
the Forge was seminal, and like many things that are seminal, it was also singular insofar as it created a very specific environment with very specific results. It is absolutely seminal in that Apocalypse World, and therefore everything that has descended from Apocalypse World came from the Forge. We would not have any PBTA games. We would not have Blades in the Dark or any of the Forge in the Dark games without the Forge. It has had a huge influence on the hobby. That doesn't mean it was perfect.
Yeah, I can give it the respect that it's due, but at the same time, I think that I pretty starkly disagree with a lot of the conversation that took place over there. Like yes. Brian says, we've evolved past it, which is,
yeah,
that's fine. It was early conversation, thoughts evolve, perspectives evolve, and so obviously some of this stuff it's just not going to be valid anymore, which makes sense.
Right.
But getting back to agency specifically, so genre as a kind of it exists on a gradient. It's like a slider, and depending on the level of agency that you prefer. See, and I don't even know if really it's on a slider, right? Like, who has agency when it comes to emergent effects? Good question. Well, okay. I don't know. It's something that I'll have to think about. I don't know if you're being tongue-in-cheek here or serious. You could just be tongue-in-cheek.
No. What he's talking about is stochasticity, right? And stochastic agency may be able to back me up on this, because everybody who gets into an RPG agrees that the dice are immutable removers of agency.
Immutable removers of agency. I don't,
or at least restrictors of agency.
I will say that the dice, because here's what happens, right?
The dice represent fate. They are the knuckle bones, right?
So here's what I do. In the moment in a carry, I decide I'm going to attack the orc.
Yeah.
Because that's whatever. It's a really easy example. I'm going to attack the orc. So that's what I declare. I say, we're in an inn. I cross from my table to the bar at the orc who has been rowdy and growling and pulling on people's shoulders and just being generally, he's drunk, I guess. So, right. So he's a drunk orc, and maybe I'm friends with the barkeep, because this is a whole story now, right? I'm friends with the barkeep who has asked me to maybe do something about this orc. So I cross from the table that I'm sitting and eating at over to the bar, clap my hand on his shoulder and say, hey, we got to go. And then he takes a swing at me and I swing back. And when I swing back, I roll a dice.
Yeah.
That dice determines success or failure, right? But it doesn't does it though? Does it affect my agency? Because my agency was everything that the character chose to do up to the dice roll. The dice just says yes or no. And is that effectively an infringement on agency? That's I think that depends on perspective.
This ties back to the idea of the GM as shaman, because back in the original conception of D&D, the GM was the only one who ever rolled dice, right?
True.
And just like the shaman casting the chicken bones or the knuckle bones and divining the results, you can tell the universe what you want to happen, and it will tell you what actually happens. Right?
Yeah, okay, yes.
So
I'm really digging my heels in on this, but I see where we're going. And Brian says, as soon as you roll the dice, the agency goes away.
Agency goes away, absolutely, because you are.
But here's the thing: hold on,
you are now casting forth.
Is agency curtailed? Not agency, right? Is agency curtailed? Not agency, because I still. What a big question.
Okay. Remember what I said. Remember what I said when we were talking about the definition of agency. Agency is you acting with authority that is not your own to achieve a particular result, and also being divorced from the consequences of that authority. And so you can go out and you can say, I do this, and it might happen just the way you want. Or Aragorn can ride up beside you and cut your head off. Either way, you have executed agency, and the results have either correlated to that agency or removed it from you. There is a gradient between two.
Right. So when you use the dice, they either agree with you and they align with your agency and support your agency, and there's a follow through. Yes. I sock the orc in the face and knock him out cold. We drag him out into the street to sober up.
Yeah.
Or the dice disagree. I cock my arm, go to throw a punch. He catches it, knocks my teeth down my throat, and I get thrown out into the street, a bloody mess.
Yeah.
That's a disagreement with my agency.
Right.
It curtails. Okay. And so because what happens afterwards... Because what happens afterwards is something that happens to me. It's not something that I haven't initiated getting punched in the face, because obviously I would just say, no, I don't get punched in the face. But so because that's something that's done to me. All right. Okay. I'm on board. I agree.
This is the difference between playing cops and robbers and saying, I shot you. No, you didn't. Right. When we were 3 years old, 6 years old or whatever.
Okay. I'm on board with that. I agree.
Gotcha.
Yes. So Brian says, is it okay that I call you Brian? Because I know you as Brian. Should I call you Stochastic Agency? Is that what you would prefer? Let me know. But as far as emergent effects, that's a bit tricky, as they're derived from novel usage or interpretation of rules or mechanics complicated by the use of fiat. I would need to break this down and consider it step by step. So as far as emergent effects...
I'm sorry, I have to take a quick break like we talked about earlier. I'll be right back.
No problem. that's a bit tricky as they're derived from novel usage or interpretation of rules or mechanics complicated by the use of fiat. Interpretation. Okay, yeah, it is complicated because of the interplay of these particular things that you've listed here with regard to mechanics, rules, interpretations, and fiat, be it, character fiat or GM fiat. This does become overcomplicated, or at least more complicated, because these things are going to be layered, and they're not going to be consistently layered in any sort of uniform manner, let alone from situation to situation. Things are going to come up in different order. There's going to be conversations about the way things should be resolved, different interpretations of mechanics or rules. I'm on board. I get it. Yes. So, yeah, I know it's you, man. I know who it is. So the whole complexity of emergent play is a grand topic. Yeah, it's I think obviously is beyond the scope of this conversation, right? Because we've narrowed it to a single topic. Got to stop saying obviously. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's terribly, terribly interesting. Okay, Brian's okay. Good, thank you. Surrendering agency still depends on agency. I think this is going to be something that TPR wants to probably answer, so I'll hold off until he gets back. And then let's see here. This is, I think, regarding the dice. They represent potential in the Aristotelian sense, and the result is the dynamis, the actual result. Both have a potential to happen and cause it to happen. The actual result of the entities acting against each other is determined by the dice. I agree. And I think
sorry about that. I'm back.
I still think that the idea that agency is curtailed or infringed or prevented or stopped the moment you get the dice out. And I wouldn't even say it's the moment you get the dice out. I think that, Brian, you phrased it best, is once you roll the dice.
Yes, it's when the dice
specifically rolling the dice. There is, as the dice are rolling, because of the...
There is a surrender.
Yeah, because of the existence for the potential of a contrary outcome to what you've described is going to happen, as they're rolling, that's it. Agency it's halted until you get the result. And then it's either supported and you continue your description, you continue exercising your agency, or it's halted and your agency is curtailed and then something happens to you to limit that agency.
Once something happens to you,
I like that.
Once something happens to you, your agency is curtailed.
Agreed.
And yes. This is why characters have agency but no autonomy, and players have no agency whatsoever but total autonomy.
Yes, I agree with that, and I really like this distinction.
Okay. Now,
so Anand says that surrendering agency still depends on agency. He said this while you had stepped away. I think that what you would say is that surrendering agency depends on autonomy.
That's correct.
Okay.
Hey, surrendering agency. Okay, so let's go ahead and step back from. We've spent a lot of time on the interaction between the agency and its agents.
Yes.
In other words, between the players and their characters, right?
Yes.
So let's step back one level, and let's look at the.
Oh, hey, Drudenfutz, I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Hey, Drudenfutz, good to see you. It's been a while. So let's step back one level from that, because right now we're inside the semi-permeable membrane, right? We're talking about the interactions within the game world and with the rules of the game and the way that dictates whether we succeed or fail and how that influences.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Okay, so everything we've talked about is inside the semi-permeable membrane. In other words, if we're all sitting around a round table, everything that we've talked about is what's happening on the far edge of that table, the inside of the table. And and so the agent, i.e. our character, and its interaction with the rules of the game world, as well as the shared narrative that we're creating, which can promote or curtail the agency that we are giving that particular agent, correct? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's take a step back outside of that semi-permeable membrane now, and we're talking about the players themselves and whether or not they have agency. Or we know we've established.
Honestly, I think that before you go, and I do want you to discuss this, but I would say that honestly, regarding this, whether or not players have agency, I think that the answer is it's made very clear by the discussion that we've already had. But please continue.
Okay. So as far as agency in the form that we're talking about it right now, the players have no agency whatsoever.
Right.
Players have full autonomy in and of themselves.
Yes.
But now we're talking about the second layer of interactions that take place around the TTRPG table. The Titterpig is a multi-layer beast, right?
Yes.
So I think that the idea that I mentioned earlier about the sports analogy applies very well here. Any player, before they come up to a table, is a free agent. They have total autonomy about how they want to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
However, they cannot simply walk onto the field and start playing the game. The referees will kick them off. They must sign a contract with a team in order to play a game. In order to play in a league, let's say. Yes. So let's say that a particular campaign is a league, a sports league. They must come up to that league and say, I am a free agent. I want to sign up to play in this league. Therefore, there is a contract, and we constantly talk about the social contract in TTRPGs, right? So we must set up a contract, and that is dictated by the management, i.e. the GM, and made to the satisfaction of all the other teams, i.e. the players, and their agents, i.e. their characters. And then you sign a contract ahead of time saying, this is the game I'm playing, this is the system we're using, these are the rules we have agreed upon, and this is the head of the league, i.e. the GM, who dictates how all of those interact. And I am subjecting my autonomy to this particular league or setup, this social contract.
Gotcha.
In order to play in this way to get this result. And these are the types of situations that I will encounter in order to achieve that result. At any time, I can pull my contract and I can walk. That means I can't play anymore. At any time, anybody, if the majority, whether it is the management in a unilateral fashion, or the rest of the table, the rest of the league saying, this is not working, this team is being disruptive, they can also say, you're no longer welcome to play in this league. And we have total autonomy in that level of interaction, but you are subjecting your autonomy, or in this case, you are no longer a free agent once you sit down at that table and agree to play with those people. You are a league agent. You are working towards the greater goal of everybody else, including yourself. Why? Because it's more fun that way. Well, because you get more. Well,
I would say that it's, getting fun off the table, because fun is like super nebulous and it's going to change from person to person. The way I would express it is to say, because that's the experience that you've agreed to have with
it is. And why? Because it's more, I should say it's more rewarding that way.
That's a very, very good way to phrase it.
It's more fun that way is so super subjective, but it is more rewarding.
Yes, because you've
100%.
You've identified themes, you've identified a setting, you've identified mechanics, you've identified all of these things that you want to comport your experience to, And so comporting that experience is more rewarding because it's meeting the criteria outset by the agreement.
Now you can actually take the ritual aspect, because when you go into a ritual, you are absolutely surrendering every bit of your agency.
Yeah.
To the shaman. Mm-hmm. The shaman is guiding it, and whatever happens, you are just along for the goddamn ride. Yeah. As somebody who's been there, you are just along for the freaking ride. And you have, when you talked with the person who was setting it up, you put trust in their hands that they would get you through it, even if it felt like it was absolute torture. And, you know, maybe there is somebody who wants to play an RPG game out there that's absolute freaking torture.
You know, depending on what the definition of torture is, and Ben has discussed this before, right? So there's this incongruity that takes place in horror games specifically, that when you are pressured and when you are scared and having ostensibly a negative experience within the game world,
it's the best one you can have.
Right. It's the best experience that you can have according to, you know, exit poll data, essentially. Which is a very interesting. Because
it was what you signed up for at the start.
Yep.
When you signed on as your free agent, you said, I'm here for this league that's going to give me the freaking horror experience. Yes. I recognize that my agency is going to be necessarily minimal, because otherwise I do not get this experience.
Yeah.
Or I've signed up for a superhero game. I recognize that my agency is going to be maximal. I'm still going to have problems, just like Peter Parker does, just like Bruce Wayne does. Or otherwise I wouldn't have, or just like any other superhero does. I have maximal agency except for these particular 1 or 2 or 3 areas in my life where I have almost no agency, and that's the tenterhook, right? Yeah, that's what makes it interesting. Here's the thing. What is it about agency that, okay, let me rephrase this.
Before we continue, because I've had this comment floating for a little while. So Anand says the difference between what you do and what is done to you can be rather fuzzy when it comes to RPGs, yet I think the perspective taking has a huge psychological impact. I agree. And this is kind of the distinction I was drawing between the high awareness and the low awareness individuals with regard to agency.
I'm not sure that I like those particular terms. I know
they're not great terms. This is literally in the moment, and it does require refinement. I will admit
it does. I know exactly what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying. I don't think the terms are very.
I agree. I'm just trying to communicate an idea. The terms they're pretty dog shit.
Yeah. Well, we'll figure it out. The idea behind it, I think, is utterly. I would say maybe more intuitive versus intellectual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what you are calling low awareness would be the intuitive, whereas the high awareness would be the intellectual, the ones who really sit there and analyze.
Yes.
Like, okay, here's how the gears are working.
Yep. Stochastic agency, Brian says, I get the autonomy part. It feels like some are skipping over in the analogy of the free agent and player agent. And he goes on. For example, I approach the table presented with the social contract. Part of that is the game rules. The game's rules.
Yes.
Do divide who has what types of agency and how much. So the game's rules empower both the player and the DM with agency in different ways. Agree.
Correct. Yes. For example, we could be talking about a GM-less game, for example, like Iron Sword, let's say.
Which I still have to read.
Oh, really? Okay.
Brian gave me a copy of that. Still haven't read it. Really need to get to it. So apologies for being a slack ass on that.
Again, you can put my model, I guess.
I know. I'll read it.
Damn it. Dude, I sent you Iron Sworn like a year ago, dude.
Did you?
Yes. It's free.
Wait, you sent me a PDF, right?
I sent you a PDF like a year ago.
Brian sent me a book, right? So he like paid postage
did he?
instead of the mail.
Oh,
okay. I'm
so
applying myself. This is the next thing I'm going to read, and I'm starting tonight after this stream. I'm going to read it.
Brian has actually sent you his agent. You are curtailing his agency.
Yes, right, I have curtailed his agency. My deepest apologies.
Yeah, no, I just sent you a PDF, and you can go get the PDF for free. It's totally free. So it's, I invested nothing.
Yeah. Well, and time and interest, and there's still an investment there. It's not maybe
minor. It's a minor investment.
And microscope.
I would say microscope. I also sent you.
Well, that one I actually have begun to read or had begun to read before Brian had sent it. So that one I just need to finish.
Yeah, because
it's terribly interesting. I think it's fantastic. Like the whole, just the idea of zooming in and zooming out at the moment. Anyway, go ahead and make your point.
Microscope is so I would say that the three layers of agency always exist, no matter whether or not the roles in that agency are taken up by different people or the same. So you would have a standard game with the GM, the players, and the characters. You would have the three levels of agency split apart, and you'd have the manager / shaman. You would have the social contract / league, and then you would have the actual agents working on the table, right? As we just discussed. If you have a GM-less game, you shave off the top level of that, and you distribute it across the second level. So the teams are now working on the manager level in sequence. It's like say, for example, if you had the MLB, Major League Baseball League, and one year the Yankees are taking over management of the entire National League, right? And then
I'm not a sports viewer.
And then it's
whatever.
And then the next year it's I don't know. And then the next year it's the Red Sox, and they have management. Not only are they managing the team, but they're managing the entirety of the league, and so on and so forth. And you go across where every team takes turns managing the league, and that is a GM-less game because you still have to have somebody managing agency in practice in real time. It's just that you're switching it. You're passing it back and forth between the teams who are running their own agents on the table. And those teams now have to figure out how to manage agency in a way that everybody can enjoy. And the rules have to be more specific.
Hey, PH, thanks for stopping by.
Hey, sorry. Good to see you, PH.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Those teams now have to manage not only their own agents, but the experience of all the other agents as well in a way that everybody's happy with. So the rules by necessity are going to be more focused on interaction rather than the rules by necessity are going to be more focused on the interaction at the table rather than just the results of actions in the table, if that makes sense, or within the play space.
Say that again.
So the rules are going to have to include the rules are going to have to gamify interactions around the table.
Oh yeah, okay, gotcha.
Rather than focusing purely upon interactions with the game world inside the table, let's say.
Gotcha. Yep.
If that makes sense. And then you can go all the way down to a solo RPG, where all three of those levels are being handled
all the way down to the bottom.
All the way down to the bottom. Yeah. No,
just kidding.
This is why I'm trying to make the model I'm trying to make, because it includes all of these things, and I'm bringing this discussion because you have these at least three different levels going on at the same time in every RPG game whether it's solo or whether it's traditional or whether it's anything in between. And at the solo level, one person is handling all of the interactions of agency, agent, and management, or shaman, let's say, all at once. But the more you have one person trying to handle all the roles, the more you have to offload to the rules. So that's why in solo RPGs random tables are so necessary. That's why in solo RPG the oracles they have come up with actual oracles, which are basically a computer program in a book, right?
Yeah, it's a dice computer.
It's a dice computer, which is taking off a lot of the intellectual overload.
Mm-hmm.
Or taking off as much of the intellectual load as possible
GM emulator
to allow
exactly what it is.
GM emulators, exactly. Yes.
But I would actually argue that it's more like look, this is not in totality, but I will say that the Oracle and the GM emulator, as Brian phrased it, pushes this more towards video game because
yes,
you have to account for all of the different outcomes on a table. Now, again, this is not,
to an extent.
It is an incomplete analogy. It's not the best sort of way to describe it. It's a little bit more complicated than how I'm expressing it. And I actually have a lot to say about solo and distributed GM models as far as gameplay goes in a very specific context. But we'll put that to the side because I'm recording a video on it. So
my biggest, like, you're not wrong, but my biggest differentiation from that is this. As far as computer games go, once you have explored all possible programmed routes, you cannot explore any others.
Yes.
Whereas a well-done GM emulator or Oracle or whatever you want to call it is a tool for sparking imagination and always giving you surprises. You can exhaust the surprises in a computer game. Doesn't matter how extensive it is. If you invest enough time into any computer game, you will exhaust all surprises,
including
eventually.
The unforeseen ones in bugs and code.
Exactly.
You can exhaust them all. Yes.
I mean, and that's what speedrunners do.
Yes.
Like that, the glitch exploiting speedrunners. That's what they do. They're eventually you have exhausted every surprise that you can come up with in a computer game because it is only a program. However, the difference between a computer program and a, let's say, solo RPG, which is the closest to a computer program, is a well-done RPG, solo or otherwise, is always going to be an ignition of imagination.
Yes.
And it will give you the
computer game is always complete.
The code is static. Once it is locked and as hey, you know, once it's gone gold, as the terminology was back when CDs were a thing. Once it has been baked onto CD and shipped, it doesn't change. You can exhaust all possibilities. An RPG is unique, and this is why I say it is ritual, and this is why I also mentioned when we were talking about RPG as ritual, and you were talking about I forget what you said, but then I posited the question. Okay, but then what about meditation? You know, what about what about the experience of Zen, as I experienced? Like, you can have a solo revelatory experience, and RPGs duplicate that in a way that no other form of entertainment does. I don't know what the Shege principle is.
It's the principle that says if a single player or a single individual is responsible for both the adversity and the resolution of that adversity, fun goes out the window. About that. Yeah, here it is. He's got it. So it's
Jake
idea in role-playing game theory that isn't fun for a single player to control both characters' adversity and the resolution of that.
Well, that's why you offload as much as possible into the random tables, right? That's why an oracle exists, is to interject the randomness of dice in correlation with extensive tables and just enough vagueness. Like, if you look at a computer program, you go and you go to the city of Denerim and you go to the back alley, and you're always going to get the guys who try to attack you with knives, and then you're always going to get the always going to get the city guard guy who comes up and says, and people actually attack you, right? And I'm referring to Dragon Age Origins. It's hilarious the first time it happens because it's so meta. And then you always know that you can go there and that exact same thing will happen. But in a well-done solo RPG with a well-done Oracle or GM emulator or whatever you want to call it, they give you the die rolls and then extensive tables and only just enough on the die roll that says something like, you meet somebody from your past who you never thought you would meet again. Okay. You have to take that in context. I'm in the city of Denerim. I'm in a back alley. I just met somebody in my past, the dice told me, who I never thought I'd meet again. Who is that? That's a spark in imagination. Now you are
25-year-old me.
You are the shaman rolling the bones and interpreting what they tell you.
I disagree, but that I'm not going to go into why I disagree. Because I have a whole video that's coming out on this.
Okay.
But I see what you're saying.
I'm very interested in why you disagree, and I can't wait for that video. But this is, again, I'm approaching it from this idea, this model that I have that's trying to integrate there's at least 3 levels of interaction with an RPG at any
for sure.
time.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm trying to integrate all of them in all of the things that people say are RPGs. How can all of those work?
Yeah. And I see what you're doing. And I think that it's obviously we've unpacked quite a bit here with regard to agency. I've loved this conversation. I think this has probably been one of the most successful conversations that I've put on the channel.
And we haven't even gotten to the bottom of it, I'm sure.
Right. No way. No shot that we've gotten to the bottom.
Not even close.
Because there's so much else to explore. And even Brian mentioned, let me see if I can find it. Please. Well, Brian mentioned that emergent action or emergent results become difficult to qualify because there's layers of rules, interpretation of those rules, and dice, and there are other things that contribute, and they're not going. And my take from that was that they're never going to be addressed. Like, there's no uniformity, right? Like, we don't apply the rules first, then we apply the interpretation. Like, it's always going to be this sort of fluid, nebulous conversation with regard to how these things are applied. So these emergent events or qualities are always going to be sort of, they're going to be slippery. It's going to be difficult to nail them down.
I think
with regard to agency, I should say, with regard to agency.
Well, I mean, not just agency. Agency
I could also be misremembering what he said. So,
well, no,
throw that out there.
I'm not remembering anything that he said because you're referring to something that I didn't read per se. But I'm just saying, yes, they are always going to be nebulous and fluid, regardless of whether we're talking about agency specifically or interacting with the mechanics of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Here's where I think that your idea of the GM as shaman is so brilliant, is because we have in our industrial, technological, urban civilization stepped away from the idea that the universe may just tell us what it wants, and we just have to go along with it.
We have stepped away from...
And therefore, we have stepped away from myth. Exactly. Myth.
And I know you hesitate to specifically use the term myth in the context of a role-playing game, but in this statement... True, right? We have stepped away from myth.
In your statement, I 100% agree. In this moment, yes. Therefore, we try in our scientific, mechanistic mindset to give a quote-unquote reason for everything that happens. But we still want that mythic, ritualistic, inspirational experience. So we create our own rules, we create our own framework in which the fates, through the dice or whatever other randomization, stochastic mechanism that we come up with, can tell us whether or not our actions are true, right, or successful. And then we engage with it as a hobby. And in my mind,
yes,
what is so intriguing?
Yes. 100%. This, you nailed it.
Materialism, yes, materialism.
100% nailed it.
Materialism, postmodernism. There's a bunch of different labels you could put to it. We have become materialist, literalist, you could say, even in a more nebula, in the more personal, I guess. We've become literalist. We've become skeptics. Skepticism is not bad, but if you are a skeptic, then that is very restrictive. Like, the idea of us still consulting the fates in a way that gives us an answer we didn't expect, that gives us this flash that we feel as though it were inspiration or doom, and engaging with the fundaments of reality, which we might call stochasticity or quantum theory or whatever we call it nowadays, probability, relativity, we have numerous names for it still at this point, which we refer to the typical layman in the same way that we would as Thor or Zeus or whoever else. I really believe, and this I give full credit to Bacon for turning me on to the idea of the GM as the shaman and the RPG as the ritual. I really believe that we are still trying to engage in that level with reality. That inspirational, that dreamlike level.
Mm-hmm. I'm there with you. I mean, of course, I'm there with you. I put that whole thought process together, not to toot my own horn, but yeah.
And it totally relates to the idea of agency and whether or not it's a postmodernist construct. And there's numerous levels of thought behind that we've touched on briefly. And
very, very briefly, because there, look, right within this, obviously this conversation, there are tributaries, and it contributes to topics that are far beyond the scope of what we're discussing here. And maybe we will get to them in future discussions. But there's a lot that touches more on the philosophical than really kind of focusing in on how these systems, philosophies affect tabletop role-playing games, right? I'm not a philosophy channel. I'm a tabletop role-playing game channel, and sometimes film. So
how does this help us design better games? Is the question.
Here's the thing, right? I don't know. I mean, it could, right? But I think it definitely helps us understand a bit more how we play games, right? Like Brian says down here, in relation to agency, it would depend on how you seek to apply or distribute it. Who has it and in what forms? And that's, I think, exactly the key here, right? It's helping us understand the play.
But also this is, as far as anything I think that anybody could take if anybody could take anything from this stream tonight as far as a game design principle, understand the genre that you're designing for, and then figure out how highly to restrict agency of the characters in that genre. The highest restriction is going to be horror.
Every time.
The horror comes from the idea that I want X and the universe denies it to me at its most basic. And then you can ascend from there along the scale of how much control over what happens you give to the characters. At the very, very top level, you'd probably have something like a GM-less PBTA style game. That's very non-confrontational, like cozy fantasy, let's say. And then right under that, you'd have like superheroes or something like that. But understand, maybe we should do a stream on that too. Let's work out the genre.
Yeah, there's all kinds of ideas that are coming out of this conversation. I think that, sitting down and kind of working out genre or setting, maybe system or setting, or however, whatever's best. Because Drivenfud says here, I don't do genre, I do literary fiction, and I am aligned with this idea. However, I think that there are, obviously, if I say I'm going to play a horror game, there are certain building blocks that you expect to be present within the context of a horror game.
Right.
You can have moments of horror in any kind of game. And you can have character-focused horror games. You can have genre-focused horror games. So, I think there's maybe a little bit of work that needs to be done. Generally speaking, I think using the term genre is totally fine. It's common language is commonly used. And I'm big with that. So, and then additionally we have here, so let's get through these. It's just a couple. Trudenfoot says, I would blame modernity, not post-modernity. The printing press and intellectual property shaped much more how we perceive that everything has to have a canon answer. I don't know.
Oh boy. I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to touch that because that is its whole own. I'm not going to touch it.
And then we have here, Yak Rep says, rationalism, materialism, atheism, etc. are all nice, but they fail to account for intangible, ineffable ideas that are deeply rooted in the human experience. I agree.
That is 100% true.
I think that it's made clear that I agree in the video series that I'm creating. I think that that's pretty clear that I am in that direction for sure.
Right. You cannot, in a purely rational / material framework, you cannot account for the one-off occurrences that happen once within a single lifetime, or sometimes once within the span of multiple lifetimes, like once within a generation or once within a millennium. So anyway.
Canticle of Restlessness, thank you for showing up. I don't care that you only joined a minute ago. I'm happy to have you. Says, you could consider aspects taken from examples of what postmodernism has produced as useful tools for part of the process of immersion and relationship to the material world. We could do that. But I'm just trying to a minute ago. Like I said, I don't care. I think that, though, based on our perspective, or at least my perspective of postmodernism, that's probably not.
I would want examples. I do not reject that statement out of hand, but I would want examples.
Okay, that's a very good ask. I like you would not want to reject it out of hand, so I think examples would be good.
Because I on the surface I don't think I agree with that, but if you could provide examples, I would be more than happy to learn about them.
And then also Canticle of Restlessness. The meta-narrative's relationship to horror, lots of room for improvement on that.
Oh, I'm sure.
We agree with that.
We basically came up with it on this stream, so yes, I'm absolutely sure that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so this might be a really good natural stopping point. We're at just about 2 hours. I think obviously there's more conversation to be had here. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and participating. I love engaging with the comments and with chat, so I thank you very much for all being vocal. Canicle of Restlessness, Strudenfuds, Yekrep, Brian, Anon, PH, anyone who is here that didn't participate in chat, Dare to Wonder, who did participate in chat, but anyone who's here that didn't participate, just kind of hung out and watched, super appreciative. Thank you so much. TPR, I am absolutely just floored by the conversation. I think that this is one of the best on the channel, and I know I consistently say that to you after we get done talking, but it seems like they only ever just get better. So maybe that's me. Maybe it's a bias. Maybe it's, I don't know. But
please don't forget to give yourself credit, because not infrequently, the stuff we talk about is inspired by something that we've already talked about previously, or that you brought up in your videos. I had when you came up with the idea of the GM as the shaman, it blew my mind. It made so many things that I had been trying to solve make sense.
Oh, BGD. Thank you, BGD. I didn't scroll all the way up to the top of the comments, so I apologize for not. Thank you, BGD. I appreciate that. Brian says, hit the effing like button. Of course, I agree with that.
Yes, please,
Dave
guys.
is here. Thank you, Dave, for being here. And Drudenfuss, I assure you, I did not feel attacked. Don't worry.
No, absolutely not.
People prioritize things differently. People have different opinions, and I am very happy to be disagreed with. So don't worry about that at all.
Yeah, the disagreements are the ones that make you think and sit back and examine whether or not you are actually correct in your conclusions. So
yes.
Please disagree.
Yes. Yeah, agree. Please do.
I agree. Disagree.
Funny thing to agree on. All right, this is it. I think we're going to end it. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, TPR. This has been fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the next one.
I will see
you all, I think, no later than this Wednesday. I still have to confirm, but definitely this Thursday, and possibly in between. So thank you all. And I will talk to you soon. Take care.
Have a good night, everybody.